Actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a very nice sloka in chapter 9. It says, Krishna tells us, engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee, offer obeisances to me, and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, you will surely come to me. So the essence of the most confidential part of all knowledge is that one should become a pure devotee of Krishna, always think of him, and always act for him. So, to achieve this, one is advised to perform, especially in the beginning stages, 5 essential activities. So one of those activities is hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. The second is associating with devotees. Then the third is living in a sacred place. The fourth is chanting the holy name. And the 5 is serving the deity form with faith. So through these activities, we can engage all our senses and our mind in the loving devotional service of the Supreme Lord and elevate ourselves to the platform of sadhana bhakti, devotional service in practice. And then we can quickly move on to make quick, steady advancement in our spiritual life. So in our bhakti school we learn that we all have this ultimate potential to taste and experience this divine love for the Supreme Lord. And this ecstatic love, we understand, is lying dormant in each of us. So one of the practices, and so to help us awaken this love, this dormant love within ourselves, our Bhakti Yoga offers us certain practices. So one of these practices is worshipping the Supreme Lord in his archer incarnation, in his deity form with faith and reverence. You know, devotional ceremonies are designed to bring our attention to the presence of the Lord within us, around us, to infuse us with this spirit of devotion, this spirit of love, this spirit of wanting to dedicate ourselves to serving the Lord, which is a natural, essential characteristic of all living entities, to want to serve. So there's many types of devotional ceremonies, practices in various religious and various spiritual traditions and cultures around the world. So in our Vedic culture we have this worship called puja. So we know that puja, it consists of offering physical objects such as foodstuffs and incense and lamps and water and flowers, and also heartfelt prayers with love and devotion for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. And we see there's thousands of people all over the world who participate in this deity worship, either performing it personally or simply witnessing the worship performed in the temple. So although we see now that Srila Prabhupada has spread this movement worldwide, and we have so many temples all over the world, thousands of people are flocking to our temple. And there's many people, especially from the Indian community, the Hindus and people, pious followers, you could say, of Vedic culture. And they may not have a deep philosophical understanding of puja or what deity worship's all about. But for them, when they come to the temple, they can feel the presence, the protection, the grace of the Supreme Lord. Just by going to the temple and offering their homages, offering their prayers. It's just, it's very powerful. Actually, the question, is what is in it that evokes this such a strong faith and deep devotion just in so many people? What is it that when people come to the temple, they just feel this peace and tranquility? So we understand this puja, this deity worship, is a form of meditation, of actually connecting us to the transcendental realm. A way of absorbing our body, our mind, our words in devotion. Aligning ourselves with the Supreme Lord and cultivating this gratitude, this love, this strong desire to transform our lives spiritually. And of course, for people living out there in the world and working in the world, all day long their senses and their mind is just being bombarded with images that reflect materialism that surrounds them. And of course on top of that comes all the worries and pressures and anxieties of just living in this modern world. So for followers of Vedic culture, the experience of going to a temple and just attending or performing the puja ceremony infused with this beauty and devotion, it can be like a refreshing way to leave all one's troubles and worries behind and reconnect with our spiritual essence. So according to our Vedic literatures, bona fide spiritual acharyas and masters, this deity worship is bona fide worship of the Supreme Personality of God in its original transcendental form. There's always a controversy. I was just talking recently about this, the Rath Yatra festival in Jagannath Puri, and the whole culture of Jagannath, and how at a certain time the English missionaries were trying, the English government was supporting, they actually drove the Muslims out of Jagannath Puri and re-established the worship there of Jagannath Puri, because they respected the traditions, the religious traditions of Puri. But they got so much flack from the Christian missionaries saying, these people, this is idolatry, people are worshipping idols. And it was even taken to the high courts of India. The English government, eventually they just had to turn the whole worship over back to the Indians. There was such a thing. So there's many religious traditions of the world, who do acknowledge a form of the Supreme Lord. Yet they don't have very much detailed information. However, in our Vedic literatures we find so many detailed descriptions of the Supreme Lord's personal form, his features, his pastimes, his qualities, his personality, his personal abode, his various incarnations, his eternal associates. Also we find in the Vedas exact details how to carve deities in his supreme image and how to worship him. So the question always arises, in people's minds, are these carved forms of the Lord actually the Supreme Lord, or just mere representations of the Supreme Lord? Is Krishna really there in that deity form? So in our Bhakti school, we learn that to perceive higher realities, it requires one gets a proper spiritual education. Some systematic devotional training. It means getting a deep philosophical understanding about the nature of the Supreme Lord. According to authorized Vedic sources, these deity forms of the Lord, such as Radha Govardhanadhari, Krishna Balaram, Shri Gauri Tai, are in fact real personal forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And they reveal themselves in person to those who are qualified. And throughout the scriptures we find so many stories, amazing stories of great saints and sages who were personally interacting with the Supreme Lord in his deity form. Some of my favourite stories was the story of Madhavendra Puri, where the deity actually came off the altar and took one of the offerings of the sweet rice, the pots of sweet rice, and hid it behind the curtain for Jagat, and then revealed to the pujari in a spiritual vision, in a dream, that he should get that he's hidden that sweet rice behind the curtain, and that he should go and get that sweet rice and take it to Madhavendra Puri, who's sitting in the marketplace chanting the holy name. There's another story too, a famous story in Navadvip. There's one devotee, he's very old. He used to travel on Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan party. But when he got too old, he couldn't travel anymore. So he asked Lord Chaitanya permission if he could get some life-sized deities carved of him and Nityananda and worship them at home. So Lord Chaitanya gave him permission, and he had these beautiful deities, Nimwat deities carved of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. So one day, out on the Sankirtan party, they came into that place where this devotee lived. And they had a big kirtan there, and this devotee was very happy to see them. But then as Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda were leaving, this devotee, this old devotee, he said to Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda, he said, "Stop! Don't go!" And then he said to the Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, "You stay." And then he pointed to the deities, "Let them go." Suddenly, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda became the deities, and the deities came to life, and they started walking off. And then he said again, "Stop! Don't go!" Then he turned to the Gaunitayas who were walking off and said, "You stay." And he pointed to the deities and said, "Let them go." And so this went on for some time, and after a while he said, "Actually, there's no difference." There's no difference. So how is it possible? It seems almost inconceivable that the Supreme Lord can take on forms of matter, such as clay and wood and metal and jewels and stone. So first we have to try and understand the Supreme Lord's transcendental position. He is a supreme controller, and as such, he can appear in any form he likes. Because he is the supreme controller, he's actually controlling the spiritual energies and the material energies. So he can actually convert the different potencies according to his will. He can convert material energy into spiritual energy. This means just as he appears in different incarnations, he can also appear in forms made of matter such as clay, wood, stone, metal, and personally accept our service. He can do this because he's the supreme controller. I mean, who can restrict him in coming in whatever form he likes? If Krishna wants to appear as in his archer incarnation in the temple, then he will do that. And of course, in our materially conditioned state, we cannot see the Supreme Lord. So out of his causeless mercy, he appears in a form which is favourable for us to see. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he taught us that the prime means of self-realization, God-realization in this age is to hear and chant Krishna's holy name. However, great spiritual authorities advise us that we should simultaneously engage in deity worship to help purify our existence. So this deity worship is actually is a scientific process actually, given to us by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which helps us on our spiritual journey by reducing material contamination and non-devotional tendencies. It brings steadiness to the materially agitated mind. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, more difficult to control than the raging wind. Mind is taking us here, there and everywhere. But the deity worship helps to bring that mind under control, for it impels us to engage our senses in directly serving the Lord's all-attractive form. And we see that here right at New Govardhana. All the devotees are just absorbing their senses and their mind in serving the Lord, cooking the offerings, making garlands, sewing clothes, growing veggies, milking the cows, out there, making money to support the deities. So many different services are going on, maintaining the temple grounds and the temple itself. So many activities where devotees are putting Krishna in the center of their lives, and they're just consciousness is centered around that. And this is what really brings harmony into a community. So Prabhupada said, if you get a handful of stones and you throw it into a pond, you just get all this clashing of ripples. If you get one stone and put it into a pond, you get the harmony there. So when you put Krishna in the center, just like I know some time back, we had a nun base centered in Bellingen, in a place near Bellingen called Thora. And we were going out doing all these programs. Around Bellingen there's so many communes, very famous communes, like Bundagen, Homeland, and all these ones, But, and people used to welcome us so much, they used to love us coming in there, chanting, giving some philosophy, giving out some prashadam, because these people were just completely struggling to be able to live harmoniously in their community with each other, because they didn't have a center. Where you see in a Hare Krishna community where we put Krishna in the center and everything revolves around that, you get this incredible harmony. It's incredible. So by serving the deities nicely and enthusiastically, with great care and attention and great love and devotion, what happens is you actually enter into a very personal relationship with the Lord. Thus you achieve the ultimate goal of life. To always think of Krishna and never forget it. Just be always absorbed in thinking of the Supreme Lord. I've got to get out, I've got to come to the temple and see the Lord. Just by coming into the temple, you're being blessed by the Lord. I've got to grow, I've got to make nice garlands for the deities, I've got to get down to the temple and cook the nice offering, I've got to come into the temple and dress the deities in their new outfits. Actually, over the years since I've been a devotee, I've always been quite involved in deity worship, and something always stuck in my mind, and that was a lecture given by Srila Prabhupada when he installed Mini Dwarkadish in Los Angeles. And he said, Srila Prabhupada, he was telling the devotees, you have to be very, very careful in this deity worship, because you're actually dealing with Krishna. And then he said the difference between idol worship and deity worship is the enthusiasm and precise attention. That when you have enthusiasm there, when you're thinking, I've got to get down to the temple, I've got to try and cook the best offering for Krishna, the best I can, for his pleasure, I've got to get down, I've got to dress the deity so nicely so he'll be pleased, I've got to make the best garlands I can for Krishna, like this. When you're in this consciousness, Prabhupada said, this is idol, this is deity worship. And it happens sometimes, I know myself, at different times it's happened that sometimes you just take the deities for granted. You just think, oh yeah, I'll just get down there at the last minute and I'll just chuck some offering together and I've done the service, I get out of there. I just wake up at 6 o'clock, I'll go down to the temple and I'll just, throw some clothes on the deities and just decorate them very simply and just get out of there, done my service. And Baba said, when you get into that consciousness, that type of consciousness, it comes into idol worship. You're not really in that proper mood, enthusiasm, that realizing that actually Krishna is really there. And then Baba said, if you get into this consciousness and you think Krishna is just a brass-made doll, then he'll remain a brass-made doll to you forever. But if you actually serve Krishna with real enthusiasm and precise attention and care, really trying to do the best you can to please him and serve him, then Prabhupada said that very Krishna will actually speak to you. He'll speak to you. So, one can set up an altar at home too. Some people, you see people like Rupa Raghunath and those like that, have like a whole temple in their home. And anyone can make a temple in their home or even in their ashram, in your room, using a table or a shelf. Some people get an altar built. And next they place, the pictures or paintings or deities on the altar. And the altar in your home or in your room, it's a place, you could say it's a place of refuge, where you're free to focus on your internal journey, through prayer and meditation, chanting. This personal worship of the Supreme Lord with faith and reverence help us, you could say, to connect with that sacred space within us. It allows us to express our love and devotion in a very practical way by offering food and incense and water and flowers and lamps. It's an act of gratitude and an expression of our desire to be in harmony with His will. In the early days, when we first installed the deities, it was 1979. Actually, I happened to be here at that time. Actually, I was the original head cook for the deities. And because originally, before we had the temple, the house down the bottom, where the village is, the yoga village is, that used to be the temple down there. And we had these Gauni-Thai deities. If you get into Mount Brisbane Temple, you'll see those deities there in the Brisbane Temple. I think they're actually cast in Melbourne by Bhaskara, Ramachar's brother, I think. And they travelled on Subhavi's bus for many years. And I remember before I became a devotee, Subhavi, they used to pull up their bus at Burleigh Heads, just in the park there, and they'd stick the deities on a table right in the middle of the park, in Burleigh Heads. And then they used to send out invitations, little cards to people on the beach, inviting them to come to the feast. And a lot of people used to come actually, back in the 70s, So many people came. And then the devotees, Bhutnath would be in the back of the bus, cooking up a big feast. And then they'd do a drama. He used to have a trunk of all these props, they'd be putting on the wigs, and they'd do a drama, and then we'd have a talk, and then have a big kirtan, a big wampa stomper, you get everyone dancing around, we'd have a feast. And at that time, and I was actually living just south of here, at a place called, in a farm. It was a rented farm, with Prahlad Bhakta and Gaur Krishna. We were there, and Those two guys had actually lived in the temple before for a little short time, but they were trying to start their own farm community down there, and I just happened to meet them, and they told me all about Krishna. So I stayed there, and then we used to go up and visit the bus. And that time the bus, they were travelling around trying to find a farm to buy, to start the first farming community in Australia. And then they found this farm, and they moved on, and then because as I said, they stayed at the temple was down the bottom there, and then they built the temple construction. We had one devotee, Narayan, from New Zealand. I think Krodeshwar was here, Gargamuni, a guy called Granshaw, Janmijai, and there's this really wild kind of Hungarian guy, Ruktak. And then later Braj Loka came and Mahamantra, and they put together, they started building this temple, and Janmijai was there. He actually welded all these gates. He was on a marathon. I think he didn't sleep for like 2 or 3 days. You wouldn't believe how much work goes in to making these gates. And he was just spot welding. He had to do all this very intricate welding. And he was up all night, day and night. And then one morning he woke up, he couldn't see. He was completely blind, from the welding. Then his vision kind of came back slowly. And because there was bit of a wild bunch too in those days. You go down, they used to call it the Wild West. Actually, when they built the whole temple, there was one thing that they didn't have in place. There was no water here. And the reality is they spent so much money into the temple and bringing the deities from India, which were made in Jaipur, and they didn't have any money left to get the pipes to bring the water here. So they were thinking, we've got the temple, we've got no water. But then, without telling anyone, one devotee, I think it was Narayan, he just went into Moolumba and he jumped over the fence where they had those pipes, He grabbed a couple of big reels of pipes and shoved them in the back of the van and brought them back to the temple. Then he rang up that company in the morning and asked them if they could come and install the pipes. He said, don't worry about bringing any, we've already got some. And then all the devotees came from all over Australia. It was amazing. We travelled up from Adelaide, you know how far it is from Adelaide to here? And we just had this bomby old combi that could only travel at like 50, 60 kilometres an hour. It took us like 3 or 4 days. And there was about 10 of us in this combi. We drove up here. And then all the devotees came, and it was so beautiful here. It was just so beautiful. Actually, all the temple presidents were worried that some of the devotees might want to stay here and not come back to the temple. And I was one of them. But they, then they had the big installation ceremony. I think Balaram was here, and temple president from Melbourne, Korma. There's one devotee called Nakula. I think he'd also lived in India. He knew a bit about deity worship and puja and all this stuff. Bhavananda was here, and they organised this big Abhishek ceremony. Then Balaram, he was the temple president of Melbourne. He was, he used to take great pleasure in dressing the deities in Melbourne, and he was quite experienced at dressing. So he was given the job of dressing the deities in their new set. I think it was a beautiful red set. And then we had the grand opening of the temple, and everyone was just awestruck, because actually one of the reasons was that not just that the deities were so beautiful, but generally most deities that we had in Australia were quite small. Melbourne and Sydney, Radha Gopinath, they're quite small deities. So these Radha Govardhanadhari were like really, you see them, they're just so larger than life. It was overwhelming, just to see the deities like that, Very nice. And because we had the 3 altars there, we had this the gurney tie, the brass gurney tie from the bus there, and this one, and then Radha Govardhanadhari, we had a picture of Krishna Balaram. Krishna Balaram deities came later. And, Bhutanath, he was the head cook on the bus, on Subhavi's bus. He became the head pujari. And he just had a trunk out the back there, where the back of the kitchen there. He just lived out of that trunk, and he slept in the temple. And he had Parampara, another devotee, Nakula, and his wife, I think her name was Nitigata. Nitigata, Nakula's wife. She was there, and I was there, and we were doing the puja. And of course, actually when I was in Melbourne, when I heard that they got the farm, I was telling Balaram, I want to come up to the farm. But they didn't want me to go, they wanted me to stay there. And then they sent me to Adelaide. Then when we came up to the festival, I thought, I'm here, I'm not going back to Adelaide. Krivikara was really, the temple president of Adelaide was really upset, that you can't stay, you've got to come back. But then Korma, he put in a good word for me. He said, actually, we don't have a cook for the deities. We don't have a cook. We've installed this temple of the deities. We don't have a cook. So, we need him to stay and become the cook. So I became the cook. That little deity kitchen there? Little tiny deity kitchen? They'd installed 2 big wood stoves in there. You know how hot it was in there? It was like an oven. 2 whopping big wood stoves. So everything had to be, we're trying to get back to the pioneering age, So I had to start cooking on these wood stoves. And it wasn't easy in the beginning. I tell you, it's hard work. Just cooking an offering. You've got to chop the wood, you've got to get in there, you've got to keep stoking up the fires, you've got to keep the fire going. And if the wood's wet, you've got to put the wood in the oven or on the top and try and dry it out. And sometimes you get so absorbed in cooking, you forget to stoke up the fire. You think, well, nothing's cooking, what's going on? Oh no, I've got to put the wood in. And then the whole place was full, the whole temple room was filling up with smoke sometimes, from the fires. Because we didn't have a proper chimney. And then I had to cook the whole Sunday feast on that wood stoves as well. It was like a real... And we had cows here too. And we had so much milk, we didn't have a cool room. So somehow or other, they'd bring up these churns of milk, morning and night. I had to try and utilise all this milk, so it didn't go off. And so we didn't know, so I was just making these every day. I'd cook this big feast, like a big Sunday feast. And the devotees would all come in from working on the farm and sit under that tree there. That was this tree here, I think. And we'd all sit there and have this big feast every day. And I used to cook, big sweet rice and cakes and there was so much curd in the subji. Some people, they say, when they're serving out, can you pick me out some curd? But when I was making these subjis, there was so much curd in the subji that I was saying, can you pick me out a few veggies? And then, we had, and Bhutanath came up with the idea, I know how we started making sand dish cakes. Big sand dish cakes, you can imagine. Neapolitan, like 3 different, strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla. Big sand dish cakes, with milk. And it was just like, and then at night, of course, we used to have, Subhavi made every single person in the farm was mandatory, that everyone had to come to the temple for the Wampa Stompa 7 o'clock arti, Gaur arti. Every night, everyone came to the temple, big kids on. And then after that, we'd sit down and have, a whole bucket of hot milk, and puris and maha. And of course, we had a lot of, when we built this temple, actually, we didn't really have any amount of money, so we owed a lot of money to all the different, people, the plumbers and the electricians. So, I mean, it wasn't that much money. I think it was about $50,000, which is a lot of money in those days. I mean, this whole farm only cost $80,000. But, so, you know, we built this candle factory down there in the White House, and they started making these candles. I think some of the old devotees remember those candles, those Hawaiian carved candles. And so, you know, all the brahmacharis, they used to get in these vans and load up the vans on a Sunday night after the Sunday feast. And they'd travel out all around, you know, Queensland, Northern New South Wales, selling these candles. And then it was very successful actually. We paid off all the money, the debt, and then on Saturday afternoon they used to come back. Then we used to have that Saturday night was the biggest kirtan of the whole week. All the Sankirtan devotees were here, and you know, having this big Wampa Stompa. Sabhavati he was one of the big kirtan leaders in those days. But yeah, so it's very nice. So we're very fortunate here that we have that somehow or other Krishna has brought us here, and we have the opportunity to do some service for Radha Govardhanadhari and get their blessings and get the association of devotees and eventually, you know, completely purify our existence, you know, develop our love for Krishna and go back to Godhead at the end of this life. Jai Shri Radha Govardhanadhari ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, go. Anyone else like to add a story or anything? Yeah. Okay.
Reading yesterday, I think, the appearance of Gopal Bhatta Goswami.
Huh?
Gopal Bhatta Goswami, yesterday I think was the appearance day.
Yeah.
That Lord Chaitanya blessed him as even an 11-year-old boy. He had his association for 4 months and said that if you go to the Gandharviki River, you get this showground and you would be blessed to see Radha Raman and myself in that deed. And sure enough, as time passed, you know, as the story unfolded, Radha Raman appeared through that showground meeting. And so, you know, by the mercy of the story he tells of Lord Gauranga, so to see the deities in not as brass statues, like how do you, what's the methodology to refine them so we don't have a dull mentality approaching the deity?
Well, you know, Prabhupada said, you know, it's actually a Vedic injunction, you know, that when you're dealing with the spiritual master, with the deities, you should always maintain like a fearful attitude. A fearful, you know, you don't become. I mean, the tendency is with conditioned souls is you become too familiar, over familiar, you know, with the guru or with the deities, then you can commit offences. So you have to maintain that fearful attitude and just keep. I know myself, you know, there's just a little tendency to do that. To just think that you're in there doing the arati and you're just thinking that in front of you is just a statue of Krishna. You got to keep reaffirming yourself that actually Krishna's there. He's really there. Krishna, you're really there. You know. And I know in Brisbane, you know, once, you know, we had to paint the temple and the deity room and everything like that. And so we took the deities out of the temple into the paraphernalia room, and then you go into that room, and it's just like nothing. It's just a room. You know what I mean? Like you really felt that the difference. You know, that when Krishna's there and when Krishna's not there. You know, when he's present. You know, we even though we haven't got the spiritual vision to see Krishna dancing on the altar. You know, when we come into the temple, you can, even though you might be conscious of it, you can actually feel his presence. He's there, you know. And also, you know, devotees have had dreams and things like that. Just like, you know, Sastra just received a whole lot of shalagrams, for instance, from this devotee in France, because he was getting a bit old. A very special Shaudan. He was very old. And one day Shastra he got this Shaudan, he started worshipping them. Then he had this dream. This Krishna appeared to him in the dream and said to him, "Where's the sweets?" He was thinking, what does he mean? Where's the sweets? And then he asked he contacted these devotees, sent an email to these devotees in France and said, I got this dream. The deities are asking me, where's the sweets? He said, oh yeah, we forgot to tell you, for years and years, 20 years, we've been every day we offer milk sweets to the deities, And therefore, told us, and now I make burfi for the deities, and the other devotees cooking milk sweets, they make sandesh and they're in their sweets. But I think it happened Savannah. She forgot to make the sweets once, and the deities came to her, and I think in a dream, and said, "Where's the sweets?" Who got the sweets? It's like, and Krishna, he does, he kind of. There's so many amazing stories, where devotees who interacted, personally with the deities. But we have to always maintain that fearful attitude, that when you go into the deity room and realize, you just always be conscious of the fact that, Krishna is really there. And actually, I think even when they first installed the deities, they asked Prabhupada, what's the qualification for working with these deities? And Prabhupada said that actually you're not qualified to worship the deities. But somehow or other, by taking up this worship, Krishna will purify you and help you to come to the platform by which you become qualified to worship him. So you have to always maintain that fearful, and always, I think, just really reaffirm with yourself, just in your mind, just remember, Krishna, you're really there. I know I don't have the spiritual vision to perceive you, but there's even some temples. There's one temple, when you go on the Navadvip Parakram, there's one temple there in Navadvip. And you go there and they just open the curtains for like 5 minutes, 2 minutes or something. And then they close the curtain again. Because there's one pastime where the deities, there was such an amazing kirtan going on, the deities came off the altar and started dancing in the kirtan. And they went off dancing with the kirtan party, and the pujaris were chasing after them and had to chase them back into the deity room. And then even now, hundreds of years later, they're afraid the deities are going to go off again, so they just open the curtains for like a short time. You ever been to that temple?
Yeah, it's amazing. There's one devotee paid a obeisance and missed the darshan. They're going to that deities, yeah.
Jai Shri Radha Govardhanadhari's 41st anniversary.